I discovered some very interesting things from John 21 today. I couldn't help but question why Peter had led the disciples back to the fishing nets when Jesus had told them to drop their nets and follow him. Jesus clearly asked these guys to abandon their careers as fishermen to become fishers of men, yet here they were fishing again. But they weren't fishing for men as Jesus commanded. They went back to their careers, and they were led there by Peter. Why was this? Well, if we trace their steps over the previous 3 years, we would see that there were reasons for this. First, Peter had denied the Lord on 3 separate occasions, and this wrecked him. Second, I believe Peter felt inadequate, guilty, and weak. Third, it's very obvious Peter was a man of little patience. Fourth, Peter was without the Holy Spirit, which led him to doubt his own power and ability to sustain a ministry he knew he had failed so many times. Think about how many times Peter had been rebuked up to this point. It was many. Fifth, they were all unsure about the future, even though they had seen the risen Christ 3 times up to this meeting with Jesus on the shore of Galilee this early morning. It is clear that Peter was struggling with an identity crisis and needed to be restored, and this was why the Lord showed up on this morning. He showed up to restore and call Peter to a life of faithfulness. And not only Peter, but all of us who commit to follow Jesus, to follow this example. But the Lord is there to call Peter and these men back into significant ministry. And we know the end of the story. Peter and these men would receive the Holy Spirit and go on to turn the world upside down. But this moment in John 21 was a critical moment, and Christians can learn much from it, particularly how much commitment it will take to follow Jesus. We see the call to love, sacrifice, and follow or obey Jesus no matter what. This is a very clear message on what it means to be a Christian. To love, sacrifice, and follow or obey Jesus is not easy. Salvation is not cheap. It will cost you everything. Remember, Jesus said to find your life, you must lose it. Dying to self is not an option. Following Jesus will cost you your life, and it may even cost you your death. To follow Jesus involves abandoning your own ambition, your own desire and control, and becoming a slave to him. That's extreme. So I had to ask, what would motivate that? What is the compelling desire that is going to cause me or you or anybody to sacrifice our lives for Jesus and spend our lives obeying him? Well, Jesus tells us the answer through his conversation with Peter. It's going to take love. And not just basic love that we all know, but a sacrificial and divine love. Here's what we must grasp. People who love greatly sacrifice greatly. People who love greatly give up things. Whatever you love in this life, you will follow. You can tell what a person loves by what they serve, by what they do, what their priorities are in this life. A committed Christian is compelled and driven by love for Christ, and it shows up in his or her life. This is why Jesus told his followers the greatest command is to love God with every ounce of their being. From the beginning, from the Mosaic revelation to the very New Testament, we are commanded to love God with all of our faculties. This has always been the expectation God has had for his people. It is this type of love and commitment that will enable a person to keep the Lord's commandments and finish the mission. Love is the power of the mission. Love is the power of obedience, duty, service, sacrifice, worship, and fellowship. Love is the driving force, and it is everything. And this is what Jesus told Peter on the shore of Galilee that morning. And if you're not careful, you will miss exactly what Jesus said. 3 times Jesus asked Peter if he loved him. Why? Well, because people follow and serve what they love. People sacrifice for what and who they love. We can see that dedication and commitment to the Lord starts by understanding that a committed Christian lives a life that is compelled by love for Christ. Was Peter compelled by love? Well, he thought so. He overestimated himself a lot. In the upper room, the night Jesus was arrested, it was Peter who promised to lay down his life for Jesus, yet when it came time to do so, he denied the Lord. Not once, but 3 times. Jesus had to go to the core of the issue. The problem was Peter wasn't all in. And we see this clearly on this morning as Peter had already abandoned the mission and went back to his career. And he led the disciples back with him. So Jesus was now going to set the standard for discipleship. He started with Simon, the son of John. Jesus even referred to Peter by his old name. Why? Because Peter went back to his old self, and Jesus was calling him out for it. 3 times Jesus asked Peter if he loved him, 1 for each of Peter's denials. That is always the question to ask a disobedient believer, because what is being manifest in any act of disobedience is love. When you disobey God, you are declaring your love for something or someone else. And this was Peter. The first time Jesus asked Peter if he loved him more than these, I asked the question, what were these? Jesus was referring to the nets, to the boats, to the fish. Jesus was asking, do you love me more than these things that go with your former life? Are you prepared to give it up for me? Do you love me enough to do that? The word Jesus used for love was agapao, which means love, but this was an active love that God has for his son and his people. It's a sacrificial and divine love, and it is the key to commitment. Jesus asked Peter if he loved him at the highest level, and Peter responds that he does love the Lord, but he changed the word. The word Peter used for love was phileo, which means love, but this is more like a brotherly love, like friendship. Peter dropped it down a notch. Peter couldn't even say that he loved the Lord at the highest level. Peter knew he had denied and disobeyed the Lord and had enough sense not to be a hypocrite. Peter was proclaiming that the love he had for Jesus was real, but it wasn't what it should be. With a less than divine love, the Lord accepted Peter and responded, "Feed my lambs." Jesus called Peter to shepherd his flock. Jesus is right here saying to Peter and to all of us, no congregation belongs to any pastor or teacher. They belong to Jesus. He called Peter to be the under shepherd to the chief shepherd and care for his most vulnerable, his most delicate, his most weak, the ones that are prone to wander. The conversation doesn't end because Jesus turns to Peter and asks him if he loved him a second time. Jesus responded with, "Shepherd my sheep." This means no more fishing. Then things got painful. Jesus asked Peter if he loved him a third time. But this time Jesus dropped down to Peter's expression of love, phileo. This was really tough for Peter to hear. Jesus essentially asked Peter, "Do you even phileo me?" In other words, Jesus was questioning if Peter even had strong affection for him. Why? Peter's actions didn't even support that level of love, let alone a divine and sacrificial love. This cut Peter deep into his heart, and Peter was grieved because the Lord was right. But Jesus again reinstates Peter and gives him the command to abandon his career and shepherd his flock. And then Jesus told Peter what it was going to take. It was going to cost Peter his life, just as it cost Jesus his life. That's the sacrifice of following Jesus and his call. That's the cost of discipleship. That is what Jesus is telling his church through this story. He needs us to know that we need to love him more than we love our lives and ourselves if we plan on being faithful to Jesus and giving our life for his calling. Friends, this is where true commitment starts. Do you love Christ more than fill in the blank? This is the heart-probing question that we all must ask ourselves today. The reality is this: you can tell what a person loves by what they serve, by what they do, by their priorities in this life. A committed Christian is compelled and driven by love for Christ, and it shows up in his or her life.